Welcome. My name is Donna Dupont, host of the Tension podcast for the Archipelago Design. Today, we are recording from the Canadian Forces College in Toronto. And joining us today, we have three international guests from our military design community. We have Robert Rosa from the Warsaw University in Poland, Florian Andresen from the German Armed Forces University in Hamburg, and the third is Anders Bollmann from the Copenhagen Business School. Welcome. So to kick off our discussion today, we'd love to know a little bit about you, your background, and your design story. Why don't we start off with Florian?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Donna. My design story. As you mentioned, as a researcher at the Helmut-Schmidt-University, the University of the Armed Forces in Hamburg, I'm working at the chair for technology and innovation management. So design thinking is really part of what we are doing when it comes to innovation management. But in 2019, I encountered, whilst doing a research study for the German military, a small team in the German Navy. And this team was consisting of 15 to 20 people that were geared towards disrupting the processes, inventing new stuff for the first flotilla, and so on. And what they thought was that using traditional planning processes was not going to cut it. So they brought in some reservist officers who were actually in the startup ecosystem, and they brought with them all these, I want to call them agile methods like Scrum and using business model canvases and so on, and also design thinking. So we thought that was pretty neat and interesting, and we started to investigate this team, and we were looking particularly at the intersection where this new team got to a point where they created a prototype, a new app or whatever, and had to get it back into the dominant system. And these intersections, you see a lot of conflict. And this is what we study. And then we ventured out to investigate what are our partners, our military partners, NATO and other nations doing when it comes to design thinking. So we ventured through a bunch of research articles, experience reports, and we reported the initial results back to the Ministry of Defense, and they were really intrigued to see how this new framework, mindset, or set of tools could be used to make the overall organization more adaptable. And so it took a bit, but then we were able to get a new research project which started early this year on how to get military design thinking into the German Armed Forces, where we study the experience of the international community. We do ethnography within the German Armed Forces, and we really are supposed to come up with a conception on how to integrate design thinking into formal processes, into the education of officers and non-commissioned officers. So, yeah, that is basically my design story. One of my research fields, the others being, and this is also where the connection to design comes, strategic management. And as you obviously know, design thinking is also a framework which can be used to come up with new strategies. So there are a lot of connections in my research background and in my design story, if you will.
That's wonderful. Thank you. It sounds really comprehensive. You're exploring a lot of different methodologies within the world of design. It's fascinating. Robert, what's your design story?
Thank you for this question. It's a question that covers many years before. Officially, I started my design story in 2016, roughly. But taking into consideration previous studies, I would say that it launched in London, in Warsaw, Krakow, London, in 2000. I started to explore Jungian theory on archetype and collective unconsciousness. So it became also part of some of my studies and some of my researches doing the design. So, and there was a moment when I realized that the story with design didn't kicked off in 2016 with official training in cooperation with JSO from USA, and then before that was also EOD school in Lackland. It's also kind of design because you need to figure out the safety procedures. It's also, based on some rules, you need to figure out what could happen and then just render safe procedures. And this is it's on design. We need to figure out what could emerge in the future because people love to know about it. So I usually let it flow and just, my studies on design covers many areas from psychology through engineering, then design thinking itself, and developing into PhD thesis, and finally defending my PhD dissertation, and running courses, running studies, both with military and civilian students. So I'll deal with design roughly from 2000, but this is very beginning, but systematic work on it is 2016, like I said. And design combines, in my approach, not only methodology coming from many countries like USA, Canada, Israel, but also from many. This is a combination of many capabilities, I would say, that gives possibility to conduct broad and deep analysis and then coming with very, very interesting solutions, which we desire now in a complex environment. So roughly that's my design story, and it's on developing. It's on courage, because design requires courage, humbleness, desired. It desires, understanding that sometimes you don't know nothing, and sometimes you meet with the people who do not understand you, but finally they say, "Oh, Robert, after a couple of days of design, finally I know what you mean." But it lasted like, at least a week. So design means to be courageous and open-minded, and I see that in my education and training, I was forced to be. I was forced to deal with such a situations, although at that time I didn't realize that. So it happened like in design afterwards.
Nice.
Thank you very much.
I love that. I love the courage, because you are so right. If you want to jump into the world of design, you are going to push against the status quo thinking. You're going to be exploring the unknown, and you need to be comfortable and open to that. So that's so true. We're going to pick up a bit more on that later in the podcast. But Anders, we would love to know your design story.
Yes, thank you for having me. My design story actually has two parts or two acts. So back in 2021, I was a consultancy at the Royal Danish Defence College, And there I talked somewhat with another AOD member, Theis. And I wasn't very familiar with design, but thought it sounded interesting. So in a mysterious way, I ended up attending a design workshop held by Philippe Beaulieu-Bossard at the Danish Architecture Center, where we tried to develop new games for a week, which was a very interesting process, bringing together a lot of different security and military professionals. So I attended that workshop and was intrigued, but a couple of years after that, I was mainly a passive. I read a lot of stuff and thought it was interesting, but weren't actually involved. Then I ended up as a research assistant at the Center for Military Studies and worked a bit again with Theis on an article, and again got intrigued. And then I started at Copenhagen Business School, doing something completely different. I'm part of this big project that's looking at entrepreneurship in new ways. So we're looking not at entrepreneurship, but at entrepreneurialism. So how is entrepreneurship part of society? What is entrepreneurship as a cultural, a political, a social phenomenon? And I actually started my PhD wanting to do stuff on how tech entrepreneurs, people like Elon Musk or Palantir and Anduril, how are they affecting security and defense policy? And then I was having a talk with my supervisor, Stina Teilman-Lock, who is working with civilian design at the Danish, or at Copenhagen Business School and at the Danish School of Design, and my project lead, Professor Christina Lubinski. And in a side sentence, I mentioned that there's also all of these design thinking processes and military design thinking going on. It was just something, and they were like, hold on, wait a minute, what's that? Now you're doing your PhD and that's interesting. So I sort of got, ended up doing this because they could really see, and so could I, that this is an interesting field, and there is a lot of tensions, a lot of contradictions that are very interesting. So I'm basically very much interested in this whole, normally a lot of civilians understand military organizations as these risk-averse, change-averse organizations. But why are they still institutionally sanctioning, doing design, talking about change and innovation? So why are the military itself also delving into what we in our project call entrepreneurialism? So that is kind of why I ended up doing or being a part of this design.
That's great. I love that story. That's so unique in terms of your pathway to design. And I love how you frame the tension, how perhaps people think the military is very risk averse, not open to design, yet there's a lot of innovation design thinking happening. So maybe reflecting on that tension, maybe open up, with the next question for our audience who may not understand what design is. How would you define or describe design simply in the work that you do?
Well, for me, I think this is still a part I'm exploring, and I think I would be I would be able to complete my PhD if I had a good question. But I think, first of all, there is to be made this distinction between civilian design thinking and the Stanford D School and all of these things, and then military design. And I'm trying still to wrap my head around what kind of a weird assemblage or hybrid that military design is. And there's also, a big difference between, are you asking the Israelis and their SOT approach, or are you asking people what design is in US military doctrine? So if I had like a short specific answer on that, I would be a lot longer in my PhD process.
What do you want to add?
What do you think, Florian?
So yeah, I would agree. There are different schools of thought there, and in the German armed forces, what we've seen is what we've ultimately come to term design within the military, meaning that we use these approaches, like, for example, from the D school. Or IDEO or whatever, these civilian approaches that are mainly geared towards product or service design, right? And we've seen that in the German military. There are small pockets where they use these frameworks to create new gear, right? To innovate new technologies to be used. What we haven't seen and what surprised us, because we were looking at it from this civilian perspective, using design thinking to innovate products. And then when we looked to the international community, and this is where I believe at least there's a turn towards military design thinking, is the areas of application. And there you find that design is used for operation planning, strategy making. So this is kind of different, and where you focus a lot more on the problem understanding, because if you, to my knowledge at least, if I understand the US approach, the design phase is the first phase in the planning process to understand the problem. And then if you have an understanding, you start the planning process. The planning process could be interpreted as an experiment, and then you iterate from that. So that is basically what we think. There are different ways of doing design, and design application areas are mostly when you have complex tasks in a highly dynamic environment, because there are some proponents of design thinking, I wouldn't share their opinion, wanting to disrupt the entire organization, right, and to apply design to everything. But going back to the Canavan framework, I would say, well, there are simple tasks and there are complicated tasks, and maybe design thinking is not the right framework to solve these tasks. But we are in a dynamic world, and especially the changing environment for many state or military organization forces us to consider new approaches to tackle these challenges. And our approaches that we've come up so far are more geared towards complicated problems. So yeah, but in the end, it's more of a framework, really, a new mindset. Someone said it's one tool in this overarching toolbox that you can use if you encounter such a problem, and whatever methods you actually align underneath this framework depends really on what you're trying to solve. So it's not that clear cut one sentence answer. This is design thinking. I guess there's so many flavors regarding what kind of problem you encounter.
That's a really, really good point, because a lot of, design itself is problem-based usually, right? And especially because of the complexity, as you mentioned. So there's a lot of value in digging deep, giving yourself time to understand the complexity and all the interdependencies before you jump to a solution. So design allows you to do that in a structured way. I know, Robert, you had mentioned around the mindset piece and really, going deeper to understand the problem space. Is that part of your approach when you look to use design?
Yes, thank you for this question, because for me, design is basically this is on distinguishing between real problems and just indicators in the problems. In the military, we like to have strict regulations, and then we apply some instructions and rules of engagement, etc., etc. But in many conflicts, especially coming from Afghanistan, Iraq, and others, the reality appeared to be completely different, and a set of objectives were basically unrealistic. So design basically is on assessing what is possible, what is in the environment, what is the real problem, and then trying to understand what approach, not even methodology, what approach could be the best. Because design is not on finding answers like how, is on finding answers what is in the environment and why it is in an environment, trying to understand if it's feasible, if implementing my ideas is possible. So that's why I said this design approach requires be humble, courageous, and understanding that you're not sometimes you're not able to conduct what you really would like to conduct, and understand that using the tools you have, you may put the pupil into serious problems. And in military nowadays, in 21st century, we due to media development and in media influence on society, we have to take care of the results of our actions. And basically design is a tool, very useful tool in my opinion, on strategic level, to understand what is possible. Then planners will know what to do, but designers have to find a path. They just, I always say to my co-workers and students, just leave this bay, just flow, get in a boat and flow. You'll see what interesting the world is, and you understand that our methodology is not always the best. So this is design, and I like exercises in which students at the very beginning, when they draw their feelings, they draw big eyes, they get nervous, frustrated. They depict, design guys as a wolves who just, trying to catch them somewhere. And finally they find some light at the end of their path, saying, man, I understand now. I trying to think differently. And then that's the big success. If you discover unknowns, if you will discover something that you didn't realize that before. But again, it requires a lot of courage, because that breaks rules, even with yourself. So this is what it means to me, and this is that's why it is very, very difficult to implement. Yeah. It's also courage, but it is about the freedom, real freedom in thinking. So
freedom to explore.
Freedom to explore, yes.
So I guess curiosity is very important, right?
Yes,
to maintain that curiosity and to persevere even when you're feeling stuck.
Exactly. Good question. Thank you.
Good. That's really great. Thank you for that. It's really helpful to understand each of your perspective and your background. It's really very helpful to see kind of where there's similarities, but unique, differences in how you use and see design, which is fantastic. Because design, it's very diverse, and there's a lot of different ways to use it. So my next question, I'm really curious, because today's world is, we have a lot of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. That term VUCA gets, tossed around a lot. I'm wondering, how helpful is design for these kind of environments? What do you think in terms of the use of design in these types of uncertain or, really complex situations?
I may start to answer the question if you
Sure.
allow
Thank
me.
you, Robert.
First of all, we need to understand that we have to distinguish and our security environment into some subdivisions. Like I like the division like simple, complex, and complicated, as well as chaotic environment. It's a Kinefin framework, in fact. And this is a very important issue at the very beginning to understand it. And in terms of VUCA, if future general officer understands that our procedures ends up somewhere, and you can fail, you can be not able to achieve objectives because you follow the path, because you follow the rules. And when they understand that complexity means dealing with many types of paradigms, and you are not able to apply the rules like 2 + 2 makes 4. Sometimes it's not 4. And design helps during the studies. That's why this is very important. Create this perspective in mindsets of future journals, especially, that sometimes you have to understand that our doctrines are limitations very, very much, and understanding this is the beginning of the design. Then you are ready to go for this trip.
That's very interesting. I like that in terms of understanding your environment. What type of environment? Is it a complex or, a complicated versus very complex environment, and how your traditional doctrine may or may not be a good fit, and how it might need to be adjusted or reconsidered in certain parts. That's very helpful. What are your thoughts, Florian, on the VUCA context in design?
Yeah, obviously, as Robert mentioned, the Kinefin framework is a really good framework to see where you stand, to know what kind of tools you need to apply. I was reminded early on when I encountered design in the armed forces of my second background. Was an officer by training at PsyOps, and during Afghanistan, we had a branch that was geared towards, or was called Foreign Area Specialists. And what they had to do was to understand the mission area. Because what militaries normally do, they do patrols and they have their forward operation bases and so on and so forth. So it's pretty straightforward. But that might not solve the problem, and that it might not even understand the problem that you face in this area. So the Foreign Area Specialist section was there to really get a grip of what are the people feeling, what are they doing, how is culture, religion, how are all the networks impacting our mission, and can we actually change what we are doing here. So without calling it design, we were actually trying to do something that was pretty similar, to get empathy with the surroundings, with people, to reflect ourselves. Is this what we are doing, what our mission states, really this thing we should be doing? Or are we solving something completely different that is actually irrelevant to the problem at hand? So coming from this point of view, I think we have a lot of situations in the military with radical technological changes, if you think about AI, drone warfare, and so on and so forth, that are deeply impacting what war will be in the future. If you think about information campaigns, there are some people that argue that many countries in Europe are actually actively engaged in the war with Russia because of information campaigns, cyber warfare, right? So we are actually in a war. And this is not in our doctrines, or at least to think about these highly complex problems is pretty difficult if you just apply our doctrines, our leadership process. So design as one tool comes in there to give you a better understanding of what it is you're actually dealing with, to come up with a strategy then. So I would totally agree that design might be geared towards, the operational or strategic level to understand what you're actually facing. But I would add that in order to get this point across, you have to socialize officers, non-commissioned officers, early on, so they understand there is not only this straightforward, action-driven, I want a solution now approach, but actually an empathy-driven, reflective one, a one where you are humble, you're not jumping to the conclusion, but analyze and understand the environment. This it might be problematic because to get it very early on in the education, but we should definitely think about it, because if you try to introduce it to someone who has 30 plus years of tenure and who is very much socialized to the old system, you might have a problem changing that behavior, right?
Yes, behavior change is not easy, and thinking in terms of empathy, that's not easy for a lot of professionals, because they're not necessarily trained to think that way. And so I think that's a really interesting perspective in terms of thinking of the people in the environment, different stakeholders and different people, and how they may be perceiving, understanding the situation and what that means for the work that you do, right? Yeah. And that's really powerful. Anders, what are your thoughts on just some of the design within this complex VUCA type world?
Well, I think that being the only non-military person here, I'll take a very different angle. I have done some research within my PhD on, again, what we call entrepreneurialism here, understood as all of these ideas we connect to entrepreneurship, individual agency and ability to change things and create the right solutions, creativity, innovation, all of these ideas. And I tried to investigate how, again, what we call entrepreneurialism has permeated into the US military over a period. And the point here is, first of all, VUCA is not new. We have always thought we have lived in a complex and volatile and uncertain world. When they did network-centric warfare back in the 90s, that was also to combat a VUCA world. Creativity, innovation is not new. After Sputnik in 1957, the amount of creativity research, both within and outside U.S. defense institutions, but also at civilian, rose a lot, because we needed to be more creative, or we needed to identify the people who could innovate and build the new, better nuclear something. So what I think perhaps, and I'm not sure this is my analysis, or whether this is military designers' way of viewing themselves. All of these approaches you have had before to innovation and doing things differently, being, I don't know, the offset strategy in the 1970s, battle doctrine and all the stuff going around that network-centric warfare, there has been a tendency to end up, at least partly, in some kind of technological solutionism. So what we innovate around, that the militaries are trying to be creative, needs to end up in some kind of technological product or service or wonder weapon, or I don't know. So I'm not sure that this is my analysis, but this is how I view that military designers view themselves, is that they are sort of the antidote to technological solutionism. So they are about innovating and being creative and finding solutions that doesn't necessarily have to end up in a technological product. So their view of themselves is more about thinking about doing. I actually thought it was quite interesting that both Florian and Robert, when I have given my half-baked answer on what military design was, both of them were actually not answering you what is military design. They were answering what does military design do. So I think perhaps that military design is something about, and again, I think it's a hybrid. I'm not sure, but I again would say that it's probably for the military designers themselves a way of innovating and being creative and using critical thinking that has another approach or another object that isn't necessarily this technological solutionism that is kind of like the baseline in most Western militaries. Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I agree. Like design, usually there's a lot of association with innovation, that innovator's entrepreneurial mindset. And so, but innovation is more than just technology innovation. It's process innovation, it's strategy. It could be just new capabilities. I mean, it's endless. You can innovate in so many different ways, right? So I think thank you for sharing that, because I don't think a lot of people realize that there are many styles and types of innovation out there. People focus a lot on tech, I guess, because technology is shiny and exciting. Yes, Florian,
yeah,
would
like to add to that, because in the German military, we actually see that a lot. This technology-driven, just create a better tank, a better airplane, faster, and so on. We had this lovely workshop to think about new tanks, and the solution was just exchanged the cannon for a laser. So it's basically a tank, right, with a laser. And this is also why we see the pockets of design in the German military are geared towards that, new equipment, but not about how does equipment change our understanding of war, or how does our understanding of war change, and how has the technology to adapt, or does this create a whole new range of possibilities to understand what warfare actually is in this particular context, right? So I agree. If you look at, I mean, I'm from this chair of technology and innovation management. There are a lot of different definitions of innovation, right? But yeah, I totally agree. It's not only about technology, but we are so geared towards that because for the last decades or so, we were always able to outcompete on the basis of technology, right? And now we see, I mean, I also agree, VUCA is not new. There's this lovely book by Richard Rumelt who says, well, just compare the years of 1880 to 1930 and see what innovations have been there, telephone and so on, radical changes in these 50 years. And so it's not new. But what we see is that we've been stuck on this, only concentrating on technology, while other agents in this area who had not the resources we had had to adapt, had to change the understanding of warfare. And now we have to understand it in a new way. And maybe not only understand their way, but create new ways, right? Not only react, but act.
Thank you. Robert, did you want to add anything to the technology conversation?
I think no more to add.
Okay.
I think it's been said, I think, everything to that. And we understand that technology is not all of it, right? We need to also develop the approach. I mean, the way we use the technology. So, so I think I can only agree with Mike.
Okay, well, that's great. That's fine. Thank you. We know that technology, there's a lot of focus because it can be such a game changer, and especially with cyber and information and things like that, space. There's like big focus there, so they can be such game changers. But I agree that there's so much more to design, and it's the thinking. There's and different innovating in different ways too that we need to also be mindful of and not forget about. So. Thank you for that. So I want to go to the next question because, you've been here at CFC for the last 2 days and you've been observing an exercise, Strategic Bridge, which is a exercise with military officers in design. So maybe can you share some of your thoughts on and what you've learned about design just by being an observer the last couple of days and seeing people who are new to design, practice using it?
If you allow me, I will kick off answering this question.
Yes.
Combining with the previous one.
Okay.
Because I didn't want to expand it too much. But what is also important for the officers is we've been talking about the technology, and it reminded me some issue about the approach. I will give you some examples why design is not basically new. VUCA is not new. Mm-hmm. But I think it's very good to understand that design is for the brilliant commanders. John de Bruyne, I hope I pronounced the name properly. That was the Fifth Crusade, I believe, and figured the conception of it. What was kind of design? And he used metaphor saying, we will not go to the Jerusalem through Turkey, nowadays Turkey, and then Palestine. We will do it other ways. We will use boats. We will go through the Mediterranean Sea and hit not the leaves, but the trunk of the tree, which was Cairo at that time and still is. And that was the design, because he changed approach, was successful. Nobody expected this move. Secondly, there was the early time when Poland as a tribes and country was developing, was like 9th century. There was the fights between Poles and Denmark at that time. That was a very curious solution taken up by one of the Polish princes. Once the Danish was invading the castle, what he didn't defend that. He left the castle with the other gate, letting the invaders go into the castle, into the tower inside, closing the gate without any supplies. An invader became the basically victim in a very short way. A third example, Brits dealing with IRA, changing the approach with using the armored vehicles, resigning from the armored vehicles, converting the idea of conducting operations from military to police-based operations with the strict sticking to the rules, combining with the patience, changed the attitudes. Nobody wanted, after 3 years, support IRA. So that was design, successful design. And I love this example because this is brilliant. If you stick to the rules, very in a very narrow mind, in a very narrow way, you create more and more casualties. It's like one of the professors said, I think was Alex, the better you do the wrong thing, the worse results you get. So design is on breaking the rules. That's why this is very important for the officers to go through it and understand it. That is something design. I developed 3 approaches. I mean, maybe not me, but I just, found them and called them classical. When you can win the battle with one hit. Systematic, when you can conduct a set of operations that will lead you to success. That's fine. We know that from the Second World War, for example. But the design approach is something like finding a completely new approach. And I love that very much. And I think that this is the set of the approaches that every officer who really thinks to be brilliant general, leading people and limiting casualties should know. And going to CFC, I love this exercise because I know it's not the end. Basically, we are at the beginning of it, but it's very interesting analysis. Students go into deep analysis of the environment. This is very interesting because they're trying to understand not only the indicators problems, but also the roots of the problems. And this is what is very interesting and valuable for me. Mm-hmm. This is very good job of the students and facilitators. That's fantastic.
That's great. Yeah, you're absolutely right when you talk about design, meaning that it's critical to understand the environment, understand the deep-seated issues, roots of it. Maybe there's assumptions, right? Hidden assumptions. And this is all very important skill sets to understand an environment if you're going to be a leader, right? A military officer leading any kind of initiative, any kind of campaign. You need to be able to understand, analyze, and be able to, I guess, adjust as needed, right? And think differently. Yes, that's, thank you for combining those two in terms of the importance of design as an education and for military strategy. Curious, Florian, did you have anything to add around just design education for military strategists, or what you've observed, so far this week at CFC and seeing new officers enter the world of design and trying to figure out how to use it?
Yeah, first of all, it's a real privilege to be here and to be invited to observe. And to what Robert said, to be able to question is really a key factor and important for officers, staff officers particularly, because they are the future commanders. And this is where the operation planning or the strategy happens, right? So to get this mindset, to get exposed to the experience that it is okay to challenge something that comes down in form of an order, which we are not used to. I mean, from my experience, we are not used to challenge an order. And I mean, this goes without saying that there are situations where you should be more geared towards fulfilling the order. If you're in combat, this is probably not the time to get your whiteboard out. But before, after analyzing how you want to understand this combat situation, those are the times where you should actually question. We at the German General Staff College, we introduced courses on design a couple of years ago. It's still early on, but what we've encountered, and these are majors and lieutenant colonels, so we're talking about end of 30s. So they are kind of socialized into the overall system, but also open up to new methods. And what we see is there's always a struggle. At first, this design thinking, what is it and why should I question anything? You've given me task, and they jump straight to the conclusion. It's every time happening, right? And you provide them with a setting and they jump to the conclusion and say, well, we are done. And we say, yeah, this is just hour one. We have 6 more days. So there has to be happening something. And if they then experience that it's okay to question, it's actually good to reflect on what you are doing, then all these aha moments come. And our hope, at least, is that when they rise in the ranks, they remember this and then can actually apply it. So, and this is what I've seen here. There has been, at least in the classes I observed, some aha moments in the crowd when they were actually challenging conventional wisdom. One of the officers said, well, what you said is predicated on our traditional understanding of the military, but what if we think about military in a completely different way? And this sparked a whole different conversation. And this is actually what the core is, to challenge these assumptions. So yeah, I'm really, really grateful for being here and doing interviews with these guys. It's eye-opening. Really loved it.
That's great. I like how you really highlighted the tension, right, in the thinking, because you got the traditional mindset, and all of a sudden you're asking these lieutenant colonels, these majors, to kind of challenge that, and challenge your assumptions and dig a little deeper, and they may come up with a new insight. So that can put pressure and a tension between the traditional way and something new. And I guess part of the path forward is figuring out how to balance the two as officers are moving forward in their career.
Yeah, we have to understand, to just add that, these are officers who live in an environment that is actually rewarding them for following rules, right? They are trained to all these sets of rules, and they are promoted based on being very good at managing these rules. And as long as you're not in a major conflict where everything is disrupted because your country is on the brink of destruction, you do not have this outside pressure to question anything, right? And as long as you're in the system, the urge to just flow in the system is really powerful, and I totally understand that. But on the other hand, we cannot rely that it's always this smooth sailing and we are never in a real conflict and so on and so forth. And even in these smaller, low intensity conflicts, we have to think in other ways. So there is this tension to get it across, because the system does not necessarily support this.
That can be challenging. And it gets to Robert's earlier points around, to navigate this, you need a lot of courage. You really do need the courage to be able to find that balance. So thank you for that. Anders, what are your thoughts? Like, what have you observed in the last 2 days around design here with the military officers?
Well, I think I'll share 2 observations, and one of them is, I was here in April as well when they did the JSCP breakthrough exercise. And if I start by that, Robert before talked about design thinking and brilliance. And going back to that, he also talked about humbleness. And the students I talked to at JSCP, we talked about this point that even though they are very good at what they do, the fewest of us today are brilliant, and so they kind of talked about this point that we can't wait around for the Clausewitzes and for the patterns or for the Napoleons or whatever, but we still need to figure out new ways to do stuff, and we need to innovate. So they saw and now we get back to the entrepreneurship stuff again, design as a way to strengthen their ability to be institutional or organizational entrepreneurs, something that could like empower them to think differently and get that, because we are all normal deadly people, and the fewest of us are like military geniuses, but stuff has to work as well, and we have to find new solutions as well. So I thought that was quite an interesting observation. Another observation I did, which I did both during the JSCP and the EXP, has just started, so maybe, but the further we get into the exercise, the more they start not just questioning their own like existing paradigms, but they also start questioning the exercise in itself. So they start like subverting the tools of subversion they are learning, which I find is a quite interesting point. And one of the things they're coming back to, these things are just tools, so we don't have to like do them in like a linear way. So I think it's interesting that they start like, the more they get into it, not just questioning what they're here to question, but also questioning the tools they have to question with, which I find is a very, very interesting thing and dimension, and which, to my, in my opinion, is also what design should be about. So that is a very, and then I think probably also, and whether that is an observation or a comment, but there is this whole question about how much is design and a process, something you can learn, and how much, again, going back to brilliance, is it personality. And I think what is going on here is very interesting, and I think the officers are very engaged and so on. But I think it's interesting, this tension between what you have to learn and who you are and how can you apply it. And I'm not sure I have any distinct answers, but I find it's it's going to be interesting to follow over the next couple of days as well.
Just listening to you describe that, it was what stood out to me was just this tension between the linear and nonlinear thinking that you're talking about. And it's this logical mindset that we're so trained to be very logical, very rational. And then the creative mindset, right, which is left, right brain thinking. So design's getting you to really exercise whole brain thinking and really expand that creative aspect. You have to be logical if you're going to implement it, for sure, but it's really expanding that way you think, and it probably takes a lot of practice if you're not used to that creative mindset and that way of thinking. There's a freedom in doing that, right?
This is the freedom, courageous, but also knowing yourself.
Knowing yourself.
Why I think in the way I think. This is also design. So.
The mental model.
Mental models,
right?
Yes. So this is what.
Tell us more about the mental model piece, because I think some people struggle with that part. How important is it to reflect on your own thinking and your own mindset?
Well, it happens during the analysis, basically. That's why I mentioned at the very beginning of our conversation or talk that my design story began in 2000 when I took up analytical training in Warsaw, Krakow, and London. And I learned a lot from my first analyst, John Biershenk from London. And he learned me through his work how important is knowing your own models, mental models, because they are your filters. You observe the world and assess the events that happen all around you. And the more aware of your self you are, then probably you will stay away from quick judgments at trying to understand what is the real problem And I think it's very important in the design training. Very difficult because in the military we have the tendencies to take up quick decisions and even believe that I'm right. Once maybe we are right, but maybe not always. That's why knowing mental models, mine but also my adversary, is very important. Napoleon used to say that tell me who I will fight with, then I will tell you what he will do. So I think he said that before.
It's all about mental models. It's
Yeah.
understanding that perspective, right? It's so important because you're shifting mindsets. So when you shift mindsets, then you can move ideas, see the world differently, and then you can have new potential solutions or new paths forward.
If you allow me, I could even bring another example of Field Marshal von Manstein from the Second World War. And I love his analysis in the book Lost Victories. I think it's very valuable story, both for not only for military, but also for those who are interested how to deal with the complex situations. I would also highly recommend a book written by Stefan Mossor, a Polish general. He also deals with that, and Franciszek Skibiński. And those three generals highlighted the importance of adjustment to the situation, following, conducting operations only by the book. It's not always successful. Sometimes you have to draw back. Sometimes you have to change the way you perform your tasks before you really achieve the objective. So another great examples, I think. So that's why the design is so important. But I think we have to understand that not everybody will be crazy about design. It's obvious to me. So at least know that it exists. That's the first step. Then, if you're ready, you will go to the oceans, to the seas, and then you will discover something new emergence.
I like that. That's a great metaphor. So that leads me to a question, just to follow up on that. And it would be that if someone's listening, it can be a defense or military personnel or officer or someone in the broader security sector and doesn't, know a lot about design, but wants to learn about design. Do you have any suggestions on how they can start understanding that? What are your thoughts based on your experience kind of navigating the world? Where would you have somebody start?
Well, the way we started was, as academics always start, they venture through all the databases and read up. But without having made any deal with Donna here, but I would actually suggest the AOD website, because we also scoured through this and discovered a lot of new sources that we hadn't found in academic databases. So, and of course, reading an academic paper is, for some, not all, not too hard, too easy to digest. So yeah, there are really good sources out there on the AOD website. I would suggest contacting the people. It was, for me at least, really easy. I had not been in this community. Many Germans had not been in this community, and I contacted a couple of guys, Philippe from the AOD network, and they basically connected me with everyone, and the reaction was always the same. Hey, Germany, welcome to the club. And so this community is pretty open, and this is what I like about the community. They love to share their stories and love to share their experience. They are all approachable. So log on to the site, and see what stories you are interested in, and just send out an email. Similar that you can send an email to me. I'm not very good at promoting. It's going back to being more humble about what you're doing. But yeah, if there are questions about the German approaches or what we have found, just send an email, contact me, and we set up a meeting. No problem.
Thank you. We'll definitely have your contact information on our webpage. Are there any particular projects like that you're working on that you think that would be a good start or helpful for our audience if they want to learn design?
Well, the project I'm currently working on, this is not yet published. So we are in the midst of there is this one review article by Cara Riley, which is a good starting point, I guess, to get feeling about military design thinking. We are working on an additional review, but it's a couple of months till you can read that.
So that we can share it with our audience.
Basically, AOD is a good start point. If somebody is interested in getting contacts and materials, readings, etc. But also I recommend doing something different, because we normally read before we do something, etc., etc. And I would recommend just do it. Just go and do it. And this is what I do with the students. I allow them to find the books, the issues they're interested in it, because that will give them freedom to develop themselves without my pressure. I can ask the questions sometimes, but I really prefer just to give the floor to the student and all those who are interested, and let them flow, because you've got some knowledge, you've got some experience, you've read books. I don't believe you didn't before. You can just confront your knowledge, your expectations with something what design is, done by myself or anybody in the AOD community, because design it's not like recipe. I have each time I need to adjust approach to the audience, to the objective, etc., etc. Despite we have, let's say, overall overview how the design could look like. So I would just support my colleague opinion that going into AOD is a good start point. But also, just if you didn't read any book about that, just do not hesitate to try it, because thus it's the good way to develop yourself. Even if you will not be designer, but you will discover the issues maybe you didn't know. So that's why I would recommend it. And again, I will leave my contact. So Donna, if anybody will be interested, then he can jump into project, and just I'd conduct the project with the military and the civilian students, both on postgraduate defense policy studies and MBA and bachelor studies for civilians. So we deal with a different kind of issues, ranging from civilian issues to military. So that's the design.
That's great. And I like that you mentioned the theory, so learning it and having your students find what resonates with them, because there's so many different styles, but practicing. Yeah. Design's a practice. It's not just discussion. It's, it's practicing and reflecting and developing yourself. That's great. I like that. How about yourself, Anders?
I don't know whether you can say I third that, but I agree with both Robert and Florian. Get involved with the AOD, talk to them, contact us. Again, I think if you're really into deep dive in the history and what it is, I would recommend Kara Wrigley's or Dr. Ben Zweibelson's Understanding the Military Design Movement, if you're really into the deep dive in when people did what and so on. But if you want an experience with what it is and what it can do, I think get involved with the DoD and go out, as Robert said, and do something, do military design. I would say the epiphany for me was attending Dr. Philippe Beaulieu-Bossard's workshop back in 2021, and this weird experience of sitting with relatively high-ranking military and security professionals and working with Legos and Post-its and it actually made a lot of sense, and a lot of interesting things came out of it. As I'm aware, your big breakthrough game did to some extent was developed out of that workshop. So it was really interesting to see. So I would very much agree with both Robert and Florian, get involved with the AOD.
The community, yes.
Just want to add, because it reminded me of something. There's also a great article by Aaron Jackson, yes. Design in Commerce and War, I believe it's called. It's really great starting point. And I also have to do one more shout out just to show you how approachable the community is. Actually, before I got into contact with Philippe, I got into contact with Grant Martin, and we chatted a lot about design thinking. He connected me to Philippe, and he actually invited me. And only a month later, I flew to the US and visited him in his home, and we talked for hours about design in the military. So this community is approachable.
That's wonderful. And it's great to know we have a community where we can learn from each other and explore different styles in design. So if our audience wants to learn more about your work, what's the best way for them to reach you, get in contact with you?
For me, it would be just send an email, right? If you can provide the contact data, I mean, phone is also fine, but email is always the sure thing. Okay. And I have a LinkedIn profile. We can
reach LinkedIn. Yeah. And you know, what we can do is also put if there's any specific projects you're working on, or your PhD and anything you're working on that you want to highlight, we can provide that contact on our website as well, so that people can read your work. Yeah. And then if they want to follow up with you, they know how to reach you, which would be great for our audience and to build the community, essentially. So before we close this podcast, I just wanted to ask, is there any final thoughts you want to share around design? I know we've talked a lot of from different angles, but do you have any final concluding thoughts you think are important to wrap up and to share regarding design and for military strategists?
Maybe expanding on what Robert said earlier. If you venture into design and you practice it actually, and this will be a little bit like a roller coaster ride. On the one hand, it will, first of all, it's a bit messy, and what am I doing here? So a lot of questions. But then you get a grip on design, and you actually see what comes out. But so you're going up the hill, and yay, everything is great. And then you go back because you encounter the pushback of the organization. And this is normal. So what I would say is, if you venture down this road, have fun with it, and also be bold and be prepared. There will be some corners that are a bit darker, and it will get messy, and sometimes you get pushback, but that's normal for everything that's new in these legacy organizations. Just enjoy yourself, go on this ride, which will actually enhance yourself and make you more self-reflective, not only in your military occupation, but also in other areas of your life. So yeah, enjoy the ride.
Very nice. Enjoy the ride and be bold. I like it. How about yourself, Robert?
This is like Yeah, thank you very much, Florian. Because dealing with the design is like being EOD tech in among strategic operational issues, where you know where the ordnance roughly is, and you have to find a safe path for that, and figure out the render safe procedures, because each time you need to understand it, how it works, what is it, why I'm here. And yes, doing design is roller coaster metaphor is quite well. I think it's a fun. At the beginning, you ask yourself, why I'm here, what is it for, and let me go out. But at the end, you're looking for another roller coaster.
I like it. So the roller coaster doesn't end. I like it. How about yourself, Anders? What are your final thoughts?
Well, I think as kind of a civilian, being a bit of an observer, and especially talking to other civilians, my colleagues at Copenhagen Business School, I think I would like to quote the great writer Hunter S. Thompson, or paraphrase him, that military design is kind of a thing that's too weird to live, but also too rare to die, because it is, for my perspective, this very, very weird hybrid or assemblage of a lot of different contradicting things, but it's still here and it makes sense. More and more people are doing it. The AOD community is growing. More and more military institutions have some sort of relation to design. So, and it, again, if you're a bit on the outside, it shouldn't make any sense, but somehow it does. So I would say, yeah, again, it's too weird to live, but too rare to die.
I like it. So, well, thank you. Oh, yes.
Yes,
Robert.
Donna, if you allow.
Yes.
I know that's the Oscar ceremony, but I would like to thank you for this, for giving the opportunity, my colleagues here, for great contribution, and from Denmark and Germany. This is very interesting because so Denmark, Poland, and Germany, neighbors through Baltic Sea, etc., etc. Not only. But I also would like to thank great thank you for Ben Zwiebelson. We cooperated and we're still in touch. But I remember when Ben said to me, Robert, sometimes you're like submarine. When I have to, I need to understand what you are. And this is also the design, sometimes go down somewhere and just pop up somewhere in the ocean. So many thanks for Ben for bringing me into this environment, these issues, etc. That was my beginning, basically, from Ben and his team. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, it's all about building a community here, and that's what this podcast at AOD is all about. So I want to thank each of you for your time today and for sharing your expertise of design. And just to, for the audience who's listening, to let you know, we're going to be posting the work that each of our guests have shared, their research and some, relevant articles that they've mentioned on our webpage if you want to find out more information. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.